Have you seen a J.J. Abrams film before Star Wars? Chances are you might have seen a lens flare designed or inspired by this plugin. Let's briefly see how Optical Flares works. An entire course by Chad Perkins is dedicated to this in the library.
So unlike the last two plugins that we've just looked at for lens flares, Optical Flares is a standalone lens flare package. Both Boris and Sapphire have a lens flare effect inside their overall package, but if you're just looking for lens flare, Optical Flares might be the answer. So you can find it if you have it installed in your system under the Video Copilot category, and I'll apply it to the clip. And it's sold in two different ways. You can actually buy just Optical Flares, or you can purchase an additional package which contains 50 designed presets or lens flare presets that you can add and have access to inside the Optical Flares interface. You can see there that it knocked out my footage that was in my chapter 6.4 composition. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the render mode from on black to over original. I also want to make sure that preview background layer is set to the current clip, the one that's inside your composition. So this is just going to help us when we go into the Optical Flare interface. Most of your overall controls for the lens flare, or some of them, are seen here. So you can control the brightness. And like we've done with other lens flares, we can move around the center point as long as the effect is still selected. So I'm going to select my eyedropper and just choose a slightly different color. Awesome. I'll play with the scale. Great. And let's hit the options button, which is going to bring us into our Optical Flare options. And this is kind of a space where we can access two things. We can basically add elements to our lens flare by adding lens objects, or we can go into the preset browser where we can see the presets that ship with Element 3D. So if I go here to my motion graphics category and scroll down, I might decide to use this monster flare instead. It gets loaded into the scene, and I can click and preview it up here. So it's a beautiful preview window. I could also click this show background button to introduce the background to see that a bit better and how that flare is interacting with my clip inside my project. I'll scroll down more in the motion graphic category until I find the golden sun, which I'll then apply to the clip. Awesome. So we can see that updates right away, and I'm able to see how it looks there with the background. Just going to turn that off. All the elements that compose up your lens flare can be seen here. And one thing that I really like is if we go here to one of the irises, so back to I'll solo a couple so we can see them a bit clearer on the screen. The last one here we can see a bit better. So with this iris selected, what I wanted to mention is if we go up here, we can see all of its parameters. And one really cool thing about Optical Flares is your ability to have textures or real life textures show up inside the iris. And it makes the lens flare just so much more believable. So as I scroll down to object shape, you can see here that this iris actually has a texture. And with the texture selected, you get to choose from a variety of different texture images. You can see them right here when I click on the caustic blob. And from this list, I can choose a real world texture like element smoke. And that just gives a little bit more design to your lens flares. I'll go down and actually choose this iris wet. I really like the look of that. I'll choose OK. I'll head back down to my stack of elements that make up the lens flare and then just unsolo those layers so I can see how everything's looking together. So really like those real world textures. Another thing that's really cool in here is if we go to the global parameters of the lens flare, we actually have some controls which are quite cool. So if I go up here to the top, you can see here it says no lens texture is added. And this is more just like the dirt or grime that you might see on an actual lens show up in your project. So instead of having it as none under texture image, I'm going to choose a dirty lens. And all of a sudden we see all this dirt up here right there at the front of our lens. Might be a little bit strong, so we can bring down a bit of the illumination radius as well as the brightness, so it's a bit more subtle, but we can mimic that real world feel of lenses. Like some of the other plugin packages, we have control over these elements, and there's just a lot of controls to discover right here within the Optical Flare options. I'm going to press OK to get out of here, and we can see that when we go back into After Effects, that lens flare updates. I've got control over its brightness here, where I can still bring it down to mix in with my footage, as well as the scale, its parameters. Now, another favorite, also, you can attach this to After Effects lights. So that was available in the other previous packages, but we didn't really get to see how we could do that. But if you had After Effects lights in your scene, you could name a light, a specific letter, and then have a lens flare attached to that. So let's just see this workflow. That's as simple as me going up to the layer menu and choosing new light. I'll choose a point light, which I'm going to name A point. I'm going to make it a little bit yellow and make sure its intensity is 100%. And I'll choose OK. And I'm going to now create another light by just simply selecting this A point. I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate it. And I'm going to rename this light B point. And that first letter is actually going to, we can use it within the element plugin to attach a lens flare to these separate lights. So just to spread out these lights, I'm going to have the B point light by moving its on-screen controls over here, this window, and the A point light over here in this window. So let me go back to the effect, and here under positioning mode, I'm going to change the source type to track lights. And right away, you can see there that the lens flare is now attached to both of these lights. And I can just offset that to get that right in the window or right where we want the intense light to be by simply offsetting it just a little bit. So I would like this lens flare in particular to just be attached to the A point light. So here under my track lighting options, I'm going to change the name starts with anything to A. And you can see there that now just this lens flare that I've created is only attached to the A point. Now to have another lens flare attached to this light, what I'm going to do is actually duplicate my Optical Flares effect. So let me close this effect out, select it and hit Command D to make a copy. Under the Optical Flares 2 parameters, under the name starts with value, which is in the track light options, I'm going to change that to the B light. So again, we see the exact same two lights, but if I simply go up to the options, I'm going to go into my preset browser. I'm going to go under the light category and actually choose the beached light and choose OK. And we can see that that beach light now enters into our scene in After Effects. So we've got two different lights based on the name starts with values. And you can see here that you can have quite a lot of different light options. This isn't to say that these options that we're covering aren't available in the other plugin packages, but they are definitely things that we should be aware of here inside of Optical Flares. So take a look at Optical Flares. You can find a ton of information right here in the library. There's a whole course by Chad Birkins, and find out some more information at videocopilot.net.